Make a patchwork magic 8-ball hoodie with me. I got all of my materials at Hobby Lobby. I ended up using the Heat and Bond light sewable, which made my life so much easier. After ironing the fabric on, I began cutting out the patches. I then put the magic 8-ball together, which I absolutely adore. I then laid the pieces out on the hoodie and adhered them on, and then I got to sewing. Here is the finished hoodie. Thanks for watching.
Here's a tutorial on how I make my patchwork hoodies. I start off by picking 4 colors and cutting my squares. These are 6 by 6 inches and you'll need about 5 to 6 of each color. You can design your pattern however you'd like, but you'll need 2 rows of 4 up top and 3 rows of 5 on bottom. I typically sew from right to left. Stack 2 squares at a time and sew along this right edge. Make sure both your top and bottom squares are inside out while you're sewing. Here's the first stack sewn together and you'll want to do the same to the other 2. You should now have 2 sets of 2. Again, stack to the left and sew along this right side. Your first row is complete and you'll want to repeat these same steps for all 5 rows. Now we're going to sew the first 2 rows together and the bottom 3 rows together. You want to make sure your seams are lined up as much as possible. You can add some clips so your fabric doesn't move around while you're sewing. Now you can sew your bottom 3 rows. Remember, do not sew your top and bottom rows together yet. Now center your top piece in the middle of your bottom 3 rows. In this case, you do not want your seams to line up. If lined up correctly, you should have about a 2-inch gap on each side. And again, you can clip down your seams so everything stays in place while you're sewing. This next part is optional, I just prefer the look of it. I'm going to add a top stitch to all the rows. You'll want to fold your seam down and lock it under your presser foot. I follow this first line as a guide and just do a regular straight stitch. Make sure your seam stays folded the whole time. Nice and clean looking. I'm using the front of this crew neck to cut out my pattern. I usually cut about a 1/2 inch away for seam allowance. Don't cut out your neck hole yet unless you're using the same hood that came from your pattern. Now I'm using some adhesive spray to glue down my design just so it doesn't move while I'm sewing. You could also use pins, but I'm lazy and I don't know, I just feel like this is more secure. A lot of the fabrics I used were pretty thin, so I'm just going to take that same adhesive spray and line it with some hoodie material. Now you need to make the back of your hoodie. I like to lay my scraps directly on top of the front of my hoodie and I'll just cut out my pattern that way. This is what the back of my hoodie will look like. Using the same technique, you'll stack and then sew down that right edge. Once you finish sewing the back, you can cut your neck hole. I like to make sure that my shoulder width is exactly the same, so I'll just measure out 6 inches and then make that cut. Now you'll sew your front and your back pieces together. Again, make sure both pieces are inside out while you're sewing and you're only going to sew the shoulders and down the sides. The bottom, the neck hole, and your arm should still be open. Now it's time to attach the hood. Flip your hoodie inside out and you'll want to try to clip the hood directly lined up with the middle of the front of your hoodie. You can flip it and double check that you like that placement. I would recommend using clips for this step and then you're ready to sew. Sew your hood all the way around and then I just like to check that my seams are clean. Now that your hood is attached, you can make your arms. I'm using this arm pattern from that same crew neck earlier. I have all my scraps laid out and I can start making my patchwork sleeves. This is the pattern for the first sleeve and the second pattern. Once you finish sewing the pattern, fold in half and sew down that arm sleeve. Now your sleeves are done and we can attach some wrist cuffs. Your sleeves should be inside out and just make sure that your seams are lined up. You can gently stretch as you sew to make sure it fits. We're going to attach the arms the same way we did the hood. Your hoodie should be inside out and your sleeves should be right side out. Line up your seams, clip, and sew all the way around. Now for the last step, you want your waistband to be a few inches smaller than your hoodie. You can keep your hoodie right side out, just flip up the waistband so that the raw hems are aligned with each other. Same thing here, just stretch as you sew. And there you go, your patchwork hoodie is complete. I hope this was somewhat helpful and let me know what you want to see next.
Miss, you forgot something.
Thank you.
Upcycle with me. Today I'm using my leftover fabric from the last project to make a patchwork hoodie. The centerpiece is going to be this really cute tree graphic, which will be complemented by these really pretty earthy colors. I start by cutting all the sweatshirts at the seams and keeping the sleeves intact. The hoods, waistbands, and wrist cuffs will be reused. First I place the graphic, then I place the pocket, and then I patchwork around it. I find it easiest to double up the sleeves like this and do the design in chunks, but you could definitely lay the template flat and lay it out like that. And what I'm using for the template is literally just a sweatshirt that I thrifted that I cut up that I like the fit of, but most of the time I do add 3 inches length. Whenever I use a t-shirt as a graphic, I make sure to line it using whatever extra fabric it'll fit on, and I use basting spray to keep it in place while I sew it. Next I use my serger to sew all the patches together, and this cuts off the excess and leaves a really nice finished seam, which is nice because there are a lot of seams. Now it's time to reassemble the hoodie. I pin the front to the back facing each other and laying flat. I sew the side seams and shoulders, and then I attach the sleeves by inserting them into the armholes and pinning, carefully sewing them on, making sure that the seams line up, and all that's left is pinning and sewing the hood and elastic waistband on, and voila, a super sick one-of-a-kind hoodie. Let me know if you'd wear this, and please tag me if you make one.
Alright, since everyone loved the first video I made, here is another custom patchwork sweatshirt. My little cousin sent me this design that she wanted, so I'm going to walk you through how I did everything, starting on Canva where I do all of my letters. I figured out how to lock my screen, so I'm going to be sharing how to do this more in depth because that was definitely a big help when I was tracing. That basically took out a step that I did the first time. So we live and learn and keep prospering through. The next step was ironing on the fabric to the transfer paper. So I did that for the main letters, and then these cutie little stars. I was so excited about these. I did 2 little layers, and there were 3 total on the back, 1 under the hood for when you wear it up. As you can see, I had a change of scenery. It was so nice outside, so I went to my mom's house and did this all on her deck. Since it was a little windy, you'll see I was ironing on the top of the letters so they stayed in place, and then at the end, I would iron them all down once I had them straight. I used the ruler just to make sure they were all aligned good, and then I got started hand stitching all of the lettering and fabric on. Here's me putting my embroidery hoop on the sweatshirt. This really helps stabilize it when you're stitching, and this part of the video was just so satisfying. I definitely want to try some other stitches, but I really do love the blanket stitch technique. And then this is how I tie it on the back. I just do a little loop over a previous back stitch, and then I tie a double knot, and that's really it. It holds really well as far as I've seen. And then I finished up the last row of letters. I just want to say this is such a relaxing hobby for me. Sometimes I just need a little break from life, so I sit down and do little bits and pieces. It's such a good way to just spend some quiet time. The last thing I did was the cross on the front, and it honestly turned out so cute. I'm really glad that I used the blanket stitch, and I can't wait to make more. Let me know if you're interested.
You guys have been asking for a tutorial, so here it is. I'm going to show you guys how I made this patchwork hoodie. I got a lot of questions if I was freehanding this or if I'm using my sewing machine. I use my sewing machine for literally all of it. I started up by drawing up my designs, and I cut a bunch of fabric and sew it onto batting. I don't really think it matters what batting you use. I'm using like 100% wool, and I like to use different color string as well to kind of make the design a little bit more detailed. It literally feels like making a puzzle because I'm just sewing all of this stuff onto each other. And the words are definitely the hardest because I have to turn so many times. I use a free motion foot sometimes, but I've actually found that it's a little bit easier for me for some reason to use the regular one. And then I literally just sew the patches straight onto the hoodie. Make sure you're only sewing onto one side. And that's it. Let me know if you guys have any questions. I think I'm going to be dropping these soon.